The airport was buzzing with its usual symphony of rolling suitcases, flight announcements, and half-heard conversations. I sat near gate 47, clutching my boarding pass to Germany, my heart thumping with a strange mix of excitement and unease. It was my first major assignment abroad, the beginning of a chapter I'd dreamed about for years. But as I looked out at the rain streaking the terminal windows, I couldn't help wondering if I was ready for all of it. That's when I noticed him. He stood a few seats away, tall, composed, wearing a flowing white thobe that brushed against the polished airport floor. His presence was impossible to ignore. People glanced at him as they passed, but it wasn't just his wealth or bearing that caught attention. It was something quieter, like gravity itself. His movements were deliberate, his voice calm as he spoke into his phone in Arabic, the deep, rhythmic tone carrying even through the crowd's noise. I remember thinking he didn't belong to the chaos of the terminal. He carried his own kind of stillness. He ended his call, reached into his pocket to retrieve what looked like a boarding pass, and as he did, something fell, a black leather wallet. He didn't notice. He simply walked toward the private lounge gate, his escort waiting near the frosted glass doors. For a split second, I froze. The wallet lay there, thick and weighty, just a few feet from me. I could see the edge of cash tucked inside, when hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars. My brain fired off 1,000 thoughts at once. You could walk away. No one saw you. You could... But before that thought could even finish forming, my legs moved. I picked it up, calling out, "Excuse me, sir, wait." My voice was swallowed by the noise. I jogged after him, weaving through the crowd until I caught up. He turned as I approached, his expression a mix of confusion and alertness. Up close, he was even more striking, dark eyes framed by faint lines of age and dignity. "You dropped this," I said, extending the wallet toward him. For a long second, he just stared at it, then at me. Slowly, he reached out and took it, his gaze scanning my face with something like disbelief. He opened the wallet briefly. I saw the glint of several metal cards, a sheaf of bills, maybe even a passport. Then he looked back at me as if trying to understand why I'd come after him. "You found this on the floor?" he asked, his English lightly accented but precise. "Yes, just a minute ago. You dropped it when you took out your ticket." He blinked once, twice, then exhaled, a smile flickering across his face. "You are an honest man," he said softly, almost to himself. "Most would not have returned it." I shrugged awkwardly. "I just thought you might need it." He studied me for a moment longer before signaling to his assistant, who hurried over. "Your name?" he asked. "Ethan," I said. "Ethan Clark." "Ethan Clark," he repeated thoughtfully as if committing it to memory. "I am Sheikh Amir al-Rashid." He offered his hand, warm, steady. "You have done something today that most people forget how to do." I laughed nervously. "I think honesty's still around. It just needs a little nudge sometimes." That made him chuckle, low and genuine. "Perhaps, but in my world it is rare." He turned to his assistant, spoke a few words in Arabic, and the man produced a sleek business card, embossed in gold. The Sheikh handed it to me himself. "If you ever visit Saudi Arabia," he said, his gaze steady on mine, "you will be my guest." No arguments, the offer stunned me. "That's incredibly kind of you, sir, but..." He raised a hand gently. "No but. You have returned something precious. One day I will return the favor." There was something final in the way he said it, like a promise sealed in the air between us. He gave me a small nod, then turned toward the lounge again, his white robe trailing behind him. I stood there for a moment, his business card in my hand, my heart still racing. Around me, the airport carried on as if nothing had happened. The loudspeaker announcing boarding zones, a child crying nearby, a barista calling out a latte order. But for me, something had shifted. I slipped the card into my jacket pocket and walked toward my gate, smiling faintly. It had been a simple act, a returned wallet, a brief exchange. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. As I found my seat on the plane, I took one last look at the runway, unaware that this small moment of honesty, a chance meeting with a stranger in white, would change the course of my life forever. A few months passed after Germany, a blur of meetings, deadlines, and hotel rooms that all smelled faintly of coffee and exhaustion. I had almost forgotten the airport encounter with Sheikh Amir al-Rashid. His card still sat in my wallet, pristine and gold embossed like a keepsake from another world. Sometimes when I'd pull out my ID, I'd catch a glimpse of it and smile, wondering if he'd ever actually meant that invitation. Then, one evening, as I was packing to return home, my phone buzzed. The message came from an unknown number written in perfect English. Mr. Clark, Sheikh extends his warmest greetings. He remembers your honesty and would be honored if you accepted his invitation to visit Riyadh as his guest. For a moment, I thought it was a prank, but the sender's signature, Office of Sheikh Amir al-Rashid, looked real. My heart raced. I reread it 3 times before replying a cautious, "Thank you, please send details." 2 days later, an official itinerary arrived. First-class tickets, private car, luxury accommodation, all arranged. My mind swirled with questions. Why me? Why now? What did he want to talk about? I told myself it was just curiosity that made me accept. But part of me knew it was something deeper. That same quiet gravity I'd felt when I first met him in the airport, something pulling me toward the unknown. The flight to Saudi Arabia felt surreal. When I stepped out of the airport in Riyadh, the air hit me. Hot, dry, and scented faintly with sand and oud. A man in a black suit stood holding a placard with my name. "Mr. Clark," he greeted with a polite bow. "Welcome. The Sheikh's car is waiting." The drive was unlike anything I'd experienced. The city lights faded into vast open land, the desert stretching endlessly under the moonlight. The silence was strange but peaceful, the kind that made you feel small and awake at once. When we finally approached the Sheikh's estate, it rose from the sand like a mirage, all golden stone and intricate arches lit by soft lanterns. A line of palm trees swayed gently in the night breeze. The driver opened my door, and before I could take in the grandeur, I saw him, Sheikh Amir, standing near the entrance, his white robe catching the desert wind. "Ethan," he said warmly, his face breaking into a smile. "You came." I bowed slightly, unsure what was proper etiquette. "You invited me." I couldn't say no. He chuckled, stepping forward to clasp my hand in both of his. "You could have, but I'm glad you didn't." He led me inside, where cool air and the scent of jasmine greeted us. The hall was stunning. Marble floors, carved wooden doors, and soft golden light that made everything look timeless. But what struck me most wasn't the wealth. It was the serenity of it all. Dinner was served in a long, quiet room overlooking the courtyard. The meal was exquisite. Lamb, rice, dates, and mint tea poured from a silver pot. But the conversation mattered more. He asked about my work in Germany, my family, my ambitions. He listened with real attention, never interrupting as though every word mattered. Then when it was his turn, he spoke not like a man used to power, but like one starved for connection. "I was born into a world where trust is often a performance," he said, staring into his tea. "People smile at you, but their hearts count what they can gain." I nodded. "That's true everywhere, I think." He smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but I have learned to see honesty as the purest form of strength. That is why I remembered you, Ethan. You did something that most men wouldn't." I felt myself blush, unsure what to say. I just gave back what wasn't mine. He looked up then, his eyes soft but searching. "Yes, and that is exactly why it mattered." There was a pause, quiet but charged. His gaze held mine longer than politeness required. I noticed the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his expression softened when he smiled. We spoke of horses, his true passion. He told me about the stables he'd built outside the city, how each horse had a name, a temperament, a story. He spoke of them the way others might speak of family. There was love in every word, but beneath his composed manner, I sensed something else, loneliness, even surrounded by servants and guards. There was an emptiness around him, like a vast silence that no one dared to fill. And the more he talked, the more I felt drawn to it, not out of pity but recognition. After dinner, he showed me to my guest room, a spacious, elegant chamber overlooking the dunes. As we stood by the door, he said quietly, "If there is anything you need, ask. You are not just a guest here, Ethan. You are welcome." "Thank you," I said, meaning it. He smiled again, that same calm smile that had once stopped me in an airport terminal. Then he turned and walked down the hall, his footsteps soft against the marble. I closed the door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed, exhaling slowly. The night outside was silent, endless. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the faint rustle of wind over sand. I should have been tired after the long journey, but sleep didn't come easily. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying our conversation, his words about honesty, his quiet laughter, the sadness in his eyes. There was something about him I couldn't explain, something that went beyond gratitude or admiration. It was like standing near a fire on a cold night, unsure whether to move closer or step back. As I drifted into half-sleep, I caught myself smiling. I told myself it was just friendship, a strange, unexpected friendship born of chance. But deep down, a part of me already knew it was becoming something more. The days began to unfold slowly, like the desert itself, quiet, deliberate, and full of hidden life. Morning light spilled over the courtyard, painting the stone walls gold. I'd wake to the sound of distant hoofbeats and the soft call to prayer echoing through the air. Everything here felt different, slower, more intentional. Sheikh Amir and I fell into a kind of rhythm. Each day he found a reason to talk, sometimes about business, sometimes about nothing at all. He'd find me sitting near the garden or by the horses and simply join me, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. He was endlessly curious about my world. "You say Americans eat breakfast with pancakes and syrup?" he asked one morning, a teasing glint in his eyes as he poured tea. "Yeah," I laughed. "Not all the time, but yeah. Pancakes, bacon, coffee strong enough to keep you awake for days." He smiled faintly, stirring his cup. "Strange people, you Americans. You rush through everything, even joy." I raised a brow. "And you don't?" He shook his head. "We are taught to savor. Tea should take time. Friendship should take time. Even silence deserves patience." There was something about the way he said it, like every word carried weight. I'd never met someone who made stillness feel so alive. That afternoon he took me to see his stables. The sun was brutal, the sky a white-blue expanse, but the horses shimmered like living silk. He introduced them by name, Zafir, Layla, Rashid, his voice full of affection. "They are family to me," he said, patting one's neck. When I lost my partner, I found peace here again. I hesitated, unsure if I should ask. But he continued, voice softening. "It was many years ago. We were very close. He was kind, but the world is not kind to such bonds here." There was no bitterness in his tone, only acceptance, and the kind that comes after years of quiet endurance. "I'm sorry," I said gently. He looked at me, eyes glinting beneath the sunlight. "Do not be. Love leaves behind its own kind of prayer." For a long time we stood there in silence, listening to the horses breathe. Something in that moment, and in the honesty of it, felt sacred. Later, under the shade of a palm tree, we shared fruit and water, and he asked, "Tell me, Ethan, have you ever loved?" The question hung in the dry air. "Yes," I said after a moment, "but not easily." He nodded, waiting. "I'm gay," I added, the words tumbling out quietly. "It's something I've always known, but not something people always accept. I've had to fight to just be myself." He didn't look surprised. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he said softly, "Honesty is the rarest kind of courage." The way he said it, not as comfort, but as truth, struck something deep in me. I'd spent so much of my life trying to explain, to justify, but with him I didn't have to. I smiled faintly. "You really think it's courage?" "I do," he said. "Because it costs something, and because it invites truth in others." I looked at him then, really looked. The lines of his face, the stillness of his eyes. I wondered what truths he still carried in silence. Over the next few days, our conversations deepened. We spoke about art and poetry, about faith and forgiveness. He showed me old calligraphy scrolls, verses about mercy, longing, and love. His voice was calm, his words deliberate. One evening, as the sun sank behind the dunes, he recited a poem in Arabic. I didn't understand the words, but his tone, low, steady, tender, translated more than language ever could. "What does it mean?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "It means, my heart recognizes you before my eyes ever could." I swallowed, my chest tightening. There was something in the air, a stillness heavy with meaning. We fell silent, both of us gazing at the horizon where the sky melted into gold. The light touched his face, turning it soft, almost fragile, and when he looked at me, truly looked, the world seemed to pause. I could feel the pull between us, quiet but undeniable. It wasn't about words or touch. It was the kind of connection that lived beneath speech, in the space between breaths. A servant approached to remind him of an evening call, and the spell broke. He nodded to the man and turned back to me. "Come tomorrow," he said. "I will show you the old city." "I'd like that," I replied, my voice lower than I intended. He gave me one last look, a slow, knowing glance that lingered longer than it should have, before walking away toward the house. I stayed there for a while after he left, the desert wind brushing against my skin, warm and endless. For the first time in a long time, I felt something awakening inside me, something both terrifying and beautiful. By the time the last of the sunlight faded, I realized what it was. It was hope. The days drifted by like sand through open fingers, and before I knew it, my time in Riyadh was coming to an end. My return flight was already confirmed. My bags were half-packed. But as I watched the sun dip low over the dunes that last evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving something unfinished, something that hadn't yet said all it needed to say. When I mentioned my departure over dinner, Sheikh Amir grew quiet. He turned his cup slowly in his hands, the silver catching the candlelight. "So soon?" he asked softly. "I've already stayed longer than I planned," I said, forcing a small smile. "I don't want to overstay my welcome." He looked up, his gaze unreadable. "Ethan," he said, "you are not a guest here anymore, you are part of the calm this house has been missing." The words made something twist inside me. I couldn't tell if it was warmth or ache. He hesitated for a moment before adding, "Would you stay a few more days?" There was no command in his tone, only quiet hope, the kind that left you with no easy answer. I nodded slowly. "All right, a few more days." His smile then, faint, genuine, relieved, felt like sunrise after a long night. Those extra days unfolded like something sacred. The air felt softer, the hours slower. We didn't fill them with activity, only presence. Sometimes we walked the garden paths in silence, the desert breeze carrying the scent of jasmine. Sometimes we shared tea late at night, the world outside the courtyard fading into darkness while the glow of the lanterns painted the air gold. It was during one of those late nights that everything changed. We sat on the balcony overlooking the dunes. The stars stretched endlessly overhead, scattered like spilled salt across the sky. He poured the tea himself, his hands steady, graceful. "You know," he began quietly, "I still think about that day in the airport." I smiled. "I do too. I never imagined it would lead me here." He looked at me with a kind of amused wonder. "Neither did I. When you returned that wallet, you didn't just return my money or my cards. You returned my faith in people." I glanced at him, surprised by the softness in his tone. "That's too much credit for one small thing." He shook his head. "No, Ethan. It is never a small thing to do what is right when no one is watching." The sincerity in his eyes made me forget to breathe for a moment. He turned away then, gazing out at the stars. "When my partner died," he said quietly, "I stopped believing that honesty or love could exist without pain. But then you appeared, and for reasons I still do not understand, you made me remember what peace feels like." The words hit me deeper than I expected. I looked down at my cup, afraid he'd see too much in my expression. I wanted to tell him that he'd done the same for me, that he'd made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. But I couldn't. The line between admiration and longing was growing thinner by the day, and I didn't trust myself not to cross it. When I finally spoke, my voice was quieter than the night. "You've given me more kindness than I deserve." He turned back to me then, his eyes holding mine. "Kindness doesn't measure worth. It measures need." The silence that followed was thick with everything we couldn't say. The desert wind stirred his robe, carrying the faint scent of amber and smoke. My chest felt heavy, full of gratitude, and something dangerously close to love. I excused myself soon after, blaming fatigue. But when I reached my room, I couldn't stay still. I paced the floor, every part of me torn between reason and something reckless. He was older, powerful, and from a world where what I felt for him could never be spoken aloud. But none of that stopped the ache. My reflection in the mirror looked back at me uncertain, eyes wide, heart bare. And before I could talk myself out of it, I found my feet moving toward the corridor. The halls were quiet. Lanterns flickered faintly against carved stone, casting long shadows on the walls. My pulse was loud in my ears as I approached his door. I hesitated there for a long time, long enough to think better of it, long enough to realize I shouldn't, but I knocked anyway. A moment later, his voice came from inside. "Come in." He was sitting by the low table near the window reading. The lamplight gilded the edges of his face, the soft lines of age and calm. He looked up, surprised but not startled. "Ethan," I swallowed hard. "I'm sorry for disturbing you. My voice faltered. I wanted to say goodnight. And thank you for everything, for your kindness, I exhaled shakily, for letting me be here." He didn't answer right away. He simply looked at me, long, unblinking, as though he could see the words I couldn't speak. The air between us tightened. Finally, he said quietly, "You came all this way to say goodnight?" The faintest smile tugged at his lips. I nodded, unsure if I could trust myself to speak. He closed the book, set it aside, and stood. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he said one word, soft, deliberate, "Stay." It wasn't a command. It wasn't even a question. It was an opening. I stepped closer, my breath shallow, my hands trembling. He reached out, not to touch, but to gesture toward the seat beside him. I sat down slowly, the warmth of his nearness enough to blur the edges of the world. The silence was thick, heavy with everything unspoken. Outside, the wind whispered against the glass. Inside, time seemed to hold its breath. We didn't talk after that. Didn't need to. He poured me one last cup of tea, his fingers brushing mine for the briefest moment. The touch was fleeting, but it sent a pulse through me that no words could match. And so we sat, two men beneath a desert sky, saying nothing, yet somehow hearing everything that needed to be said. That night, the desert was quieter than I'd ever heard it. Even the wind seemed to sleep. The moonlight spilled pale over the courtyard stones, and from Sheikh Amir's chamber came the faint glow of a single candle. I lingered there in the doorway longer than I meant to, uncertain, breathless, caught between sense and something far deeper. He looked up from where he sat, still in his robe, still calm. But there was a softness in his eyes now, something unguarded, as if he too had stopped pretending that this was just hospitality. "Can I hesitated, the words barely forming. "Can I sleep beside you tonight?" For a moment he didn't move. His gaze searched mine, not for permission, but for truth. Then he nodded once slowly. "Yes," he said, almost in a whisper. "You can." He gestured to the wide bed at the center of the room. The sheets were pale linen, smooth and cool, the kind of fabric that caught light like water. I slipped off my sandals, feeling strangely weightless, and lay down beside him. Not touching, just near enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. The candle flickered on the bedside table, its flame bending and breathing like a living thing. For a while, neither of us spoke. The air between us seemed to hum, not with desire, but with something gentler, sadder, more real. I could hear his breathing, steady and low. I could almost count the beats of his heart in the silence. Then his voice, soft, uncertain. "Why did you really come here tonight?" I turned to face him. His profile was golden in the light, every line of his face a map of experience, restraint, and quiet dignity. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe because I didn't want to be alone tonight." He exhaled, slow and deep, his gaze still fixed on the ceiling. "Loneliness," he said, "is a kind of hunger. You can feed it with company, but it only quiets when someone truly sees you." I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. "You saw me," I said quietly, "when I didn't think anyone would." He turned his head then, and our eyes met. The distance between us dissolved in that look. No pretense, no barriers, no fear. Just two people stripped down to truth. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that trembles before it reaches the lips. "I haven't felt this in years," he murmured. This stillness, as if the world finally stopped asking me to be strong. His words brushed against something raw inside me. "I know that feeling," I whispered. "Always being strong for others, until you forget what it's like to be held, to be safe." He shifted slightly, closing the space between us by an inch. I could feel the warmth of his breath now, the rhythm of his heartbeat syncing with mine in the quiet. "I don't know if I deserve this peace," he said. "No one earns peace," I replied. "It's something we allow ourselves, if we're brave enough." He closed his eyes, a soft sigh escaping him, as though the truth in those words settled somewhere deep in his chest. The candlelight trembled again, throwing small halos across the ceiling. Shadows danced like memories. All the years he had spent locked inside duty, all the years I had spent hiding behind politeness and fear. And now, all of it was silent. He turned to me then, his hand hovering uncertainly before resting on the space between us, not touching, but near enough that the gesture itself felt intimate. "Ethan," he whispered, my name breaking softly in his throat. "Yes? Thank you for coming back that day at the airport and tonight." I felt my throat tighten. "You don't need to thank me. You gave me more than you know." The silence that followed was gentle, almost holy. When he finally reached out and let his hand rest over mine, the touch was warm and steady, not possessive, not searching, just present. The candle burned lower, and the night deepened around us. Outside, the desert wind sighed against the windows, carrying the faint smell of sand and jasmine. I turned on my side, facing him fully now. His eyes were half closed, his expression peaceful in a way I had never seen before. Without words, I moved closer until our foreheads met, a quiet meeting of skin, breath, and trust. He didn't pull away. For a long while, we stayed like that. His arm slipped around me, tentative at first, then sure. I rested against him, feeling the slow rise and fall of his chest, the quiet rhythm of another life beside my own. We didn't speak again. We didn't need to. There were no confessions, no promises, no desperate kisses. Only the steady pulse of connection, the kind that fills the cracks left by solitude and silence. His thumb brushed once against my hand before stilling. I closed my eyes, and in that moment I understood. This wasn't about desire or daring or breaking rules. It was about finding peace. Two lonely souls who had wandered far enough through emptiness to finally find rest in each other's presence. Outside, the candlelight waned. Inside, the night stretched on, soft, endless, and kind. By the time dawn touched the horizon, neither of us had slept much. But when I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was him, calm, serene, his hand still resting near mine. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. I felt home. The first light of morning slid through the carved wooden lattice, spilling gold across the room. The candle had long burned out, leaving only the faint scent of wax and the hush that follows peace. For a moment, I didn't move. I just lay there, feeling the quiet pulse of dawn and the slow, even rhythm of Sheikh Amir's breathing beside me. His robe had slipped from one shoulder, the sunlight tracing the edge of his skin like a painter's brush. He looked at ease, lighter. When he stirred, he didn't seem surprised to see me still there. Instead, he smiled, a small, knowing smile that said everything words could not. "Good morning," he murmured. "Morning," I said, my voice softer than I expected. For a while, we said nothing more. We just existed in that fragile, tender silence, the kind that comes when the storm inside you has finally passed. Then he sat up, reaching for the teapot on the small tray beside the bed. He poured 2 cups, the aroma of mint and cardamom filling the room. "I thought I wouldn't sleep at all," he said, handing me 1 cup. "But I did, deeply, peacefully." "I didn't sleep much," I admitted with a faint smile. I was afraid if I closed my eyes I'd wake up and this would all disappear. He chuckled, the sound warm and low. "It's real," he said. "You were here. You are here." We sipped our tea in quiet understanding. The warmth spread through me, but it wasn't just from the drink. It was something gentler. The feeling of being seen not as a visitor, not as a stranger, but as someone who mattered. He set his cup down and turned to me, eyes thoughtful. "You know," he began, "last night was not just about company. It was about remembering what it feels like to be alive." I looked at him, surprised by his honesty. "You've given me something I thought I'd lost. The sense that the heart can still wake no matter how long it's been asleep." I felt my chest tighten with emotion. "And you gave me something too," I said quietly. "You showed me that peace isn't found in places. It's found in people." He smiled at that, his eyes soft but bright with a kind of pride. "You remind me of the man I used to be, before life became about duty and expectations, before I forgot how to simply feel." There was no guilt in his tone, no regret, only gratitude. Then, almost as if the thought had been waiting all along, he said, "I want to start something new. A charity, For education for children who have nothing but their honesty to guide them. I blinked. That's beautiful, he nodded. But I don't want it to bear my name. I want it to bear yours, my name. He smiled again, that same faint smile from the airport when I had returned his wallet. You brought honesty back into my life, he said simply. Let it stand for something. For those who think integrity has no reward. The words hit me deep. I couldn't speak for a moment. The gesture, so sincere, so unexpected, felt larger than the room, larger than either of us. Thank you, I finally whispered. He reached out, resting his hand over mine. No, he said softly. Thank you. The morning stretched on quietly after that. Outside, the call to prayer rose over the desert, solemn and beautiful. I watched him close his eyes and bow his head in silence, his lips moving with words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. When it was time for me to leave, there were no tears, no long embraces, just that same peace, the kind that lingers even when goodbyes are spoken. At the doorway, he walked me out, the sunlight falling full upon his face. His expression was calm, serene, as if he, too, knew this wasn't an ending but something more permanent, a chapter written in the quiet language of truth. I'll see you again, he said. I know, I replied. In some way, I think I always will. He gave a small nod. Wherever you go, may honesty be your passport. I smiled, unable to hide the emotion in my throat. And may peace be yours. He inclined his head, dignified, gentle, and then I turned toward the waiting car. As it carried me away through the dunes, I looked back once, just once, at the silhouette of his home against the horizon. The air shimmered in the desert heat, and for a heartbeat, it felt as if the entire world had paused, holding that moment in its palm before letting it drift away. I leaned back against the seat, watching the endless golden sands blur into one another, feeling something inside me shift, settle, and finally rest. I realized then that what happened between us wasn't just love, it was transformation. It was two lives brushing together long enough to remind each other that honesty, connection, and peace are all just different forms of the same truth. As the desert disappeared behind me and the road opened ahead, I thought back to that first day, to the airport, the fallen wallet, the choice to return it. I went to Germany chasing my future, I whispered to myself, smiling. But I found it in the desert, in the eyes of a man who taught me that the heart recognizes truth long before the world does. Months later, winter had settled over New York. Pale skies, soft winds, and the quiet hum of a city that never really slept. I was home again, back to my old life, though everything somehow felt different. The noise, the people, even the way sunlight filtered through my apartment window, all of it seemed softer now, as if the desert had followed me back across the ocean and settled inside me. One morning, as I sifted through the mail stacked on my desk, I saw an envelope unlike the others, cream-colored, sealed with a gold crest pressed into the wax. My heart gave a quiet, certain tremor before I even read the name. It was from him. My fingers lingered on the seal for a long time before breaking it. Inside there was a letter, his handwriting neat, deliberate, and familiar, and a photograph. The photo showed a small building standing proud against a wide blue sky. The desert stretched endlessly behind it, the sand shimmering like gold dust. Children stood in front, smiling shyly at the camera, holding books against their chests, and above the doorway in both Arabic and English the sign read, "The Ethan School, for those who live with honesty." I stared at the words until they blurred. My chest tightened, not from sadness but something purer, a quiet joy that made breathing feel different, deeper somehow. In the letter, his words were few, but each carried the weight of sincerity. For the one who reminded me that honesty is a form of love. May this place teach others what you taught me, that truth once shared never truly fades. Amir. I pressed the paper to my chest, closing my eyes. For a moment I could almost feel the warmth of that desert night again, the stillness, the candlelight, the sound of his steady breath beside me. It all came back, not as longing but as gratitude. He hadn't vanished from my life. He had simply become part of it, woven quietly into the person I was becoming. That evening, I walked to the riverfront near my apartment. The sun was setting. Not a desert sun, but still golden, still wide. I watched the reflection ripple across the water, and for a fleeting second, it looked like dunes. I smiled to myself and whispered, "Some people enter your life for a reason, and stay there forever, even when they're far away." The wind brushed against my face, cold, familiar, carrying with it the faintest scent of sand and memory. I tucked the letter back into my coat pocket, knowing I would keep it close, not as a reminder of what was lost, but of what was found. Because sometimes, fate doesn't just give you a person. It gives you a moment, one that changes the way you see the world, the way you see yourself. And for me, that moment would always be the desert. Always him.